We're moving in a different direction. Chase Halvorson didn't look up when he said it. His manicured hands pushed a white envelope across the polished walnut table, the motion smooth, deliberate. The morning light from the 38th floor windows caught the edges of the paper like it was meant to be framed. Lauren Price, head of human resources, sat to his right. Her voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who'd done this too many times. Your position is being eliminated, Amelia. Effective today. 12 years, compressed into 2 sentences. I kept my hands flat on the table, the envelope's reflection splitting my fingers in two. I didn't blink. Didn't speak. The silence was my only reply until Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her seat. You'll receive your severance, of course, she continued, along with payout for unused vacation days. We'd appreciate your cooperation during the transition. Chase finally looked up, leaning back in his chair with a small, satisfied smirk. Frankly, Amelia, skipping my party last weekend said a lot about where your priorities are. There it was. Not a performance issue. Not restructuring. A birthday party in the Hamptons. His birthday party. Champagne towers, a DJ flown in from Ibiza, influencers posed by the pool. I had chosen Boston instead, spending the weekend finalizing a $180 million, multi-year deal with one of our most cautious potential clients. That deal would have been the largest new contract Halvorson Dynamics signed this fiscal year. But I didn't mention it. Instead, I looked at him the way you look at a clock that's already 15 minutes slow. Noted. Lauren slid a printed checklist from her folder. We'll need your laptop, company phone, and access card turned in by end of day. IT will assist with the data transfer. I nodded once. Understood. Chase leaned forward, elbows on the table, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for. And Amelia, no hard feelings. It's just business. I stood, smoothing the front of my charcoal gray suit. The wheels of my chair whispered against the hardwood as I pushed it neatly back into place. Of course, I said. Lauren offered her hand. I shook it. Chase didn't offer his. The hallway outside was too quiet for a Tuesday morning. A few heads turned as I walked past, but no one met my eyes. The skyline shadowed me through the glass panel steel and glass towers I'd helped fill with our technology, our contracts, our influence. Inside my office, the air was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a meeting everyone had known was coming except the one person they thought couldn't be replaced. I closed the door. Took a moment to stand at the window, looking down at Madison Avenue 38 floors below. On the credenza was a framed photograph from the Helix 9 launch, the data analytics platform I'd led from concept to global rollout. The signatures of my team surrounded the matte border, a quiet reminder of nights and weekends spent building something that worked flawlessly across 6 continents. Helix 9 was the reason we secured long-term contracts with Fortune 50 companies, the reason our analytics division alone generated 45% of annual revenue. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a cardboard box. Family photo first, my parents' anniversary dinner, my brother's graduation. Then the Mont Blanc pen from closing the Henderson account. A small jade plant, stubborn enough to survive 5 office relocations. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Cho, one of my senior managers. This is insane. I can't believe it. I didn't answer. I slid my access card into the envelope with the termination letter. One last look around the room didn't feel like mine anymore. Carrying the box, I stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, Chase appeared down the hall, flanked by 2 members of his team. He didn't look in my direction. By the time the elevator hit the lobby, my mind had already shifted. There was no panic, no desperation. Just the cold clarity of someone who understood where the real leverage lived and who still held it. The glass doors parted, and the January air hit sharp and clean. I adjusted my coat, stepped into the current of the city, and kept walking. They thought the meeting had ended. It hadn't even started. I didn't head straight home. Instead, I stopped at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place with too few seats and espresso strong enough to keep a deal alive past midnight. I slid into a corner booth, set the cardboard box beside me, and let the steam from my Americano rise between me and the January chill still clinging to my coat. From here, I could finally let my mind drift not to what had just happened, but to how we got here. I joined Halvorson Dynamics 12 years ago when the company was still a promising mid-tier tech player trying to find its edge in the hyper-competitive data analytics market. The CEO, Martin Halvorson, had been a sharp operator back then, decisive, willing to gamble on talent if he saw real potential. In my second week, he called me into his office. No assistants, no agenda. Just a single question: if you could build anything here, what would it be? That was the seed of Helix 9. A modular, AI-driven analytics engine designed not just to track consumer data but to predict behavior in real time with unmatched accuracy. It was an audacious goal for a company our size at the time, but Martin backed me. I built a cross-functional team: engineers, data scientists, product managers, and we went to work. The first launch took 18 months. The first client to sign on was a Fortune 100 retail chain. Within 2 years, Helix 9 wasn't just a product line, it was the beating heart of Halvorson Dynamics. Our analytics division went from $400 million in revenue to $3.9 billion annually. My name became a fixture in quarterly board presentations, not because I sought the spotlight, but because the results were undeniable. The contracts I secured had 3, 5, sometimes 7-year terms. They locked in predictable revenue streams that made our stock attractive and our competitors nervous. For a while, Martin treated me like a true partner. I had a direct line to him for strategic decisions, and I was in every major meeting that mattered. He understood that trust with clients was personal, not just contractual. But things change when bloodline enters the room. Chase arrived 2 years ago, fresh from a VP of global branding stint at a lifestyle startup that folded after 18 months. Officially, he came on as vice president of marketing. Unofficially, everyone knew he was being groomed for something bigger. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I even offered to loop him into our client summits so he could see how relationships were maintained at scale. But it didn't take long to see the pattern: long on charm, short on follow-through. He liked grand gestures, big events, flashy presentations that made noise but moved no needle. Then the subtle shifts began. I stopped receiving calendar invites for certain informal strategy sessions. A quarterly review meeting I'd led for years was suddenly restructured under Chase's purview. My access to certain financial projections was temporarily restricted due to a new internal workflow. I brought it up to Martin once. He brushed it off as just a little reorganization, but the look in his eyes said it all. He wasn't going to push back on his nephew. The most telling moment came 6 months ago. We were preparing for a contract renewal with one of our largest clients, a global logistics giant whose entire predictive routing system ran on Helix 9. I'd handled their account personally for a decade. Chase insisted on leading the renewal pitch. "We need to bring fresh energy to the table," he said. I watched as he filled the deck with buzzwords and glossy mock-ups that had no connection to the client's actual pain points. I cleaned it up quietly before the meeting, making sure the data models and projections were accurate. The client renewed for another 5 years, but in the follow-up press release, Chase's name was the only one mentioned. From there, the isolation accelerated. Invitations stopped altogether. Project updates were filtered through intermediaries. When Chase's team started auditing Helix 9's back-end for marketing integration, I knew exactly what they were: fishing for a way to detach me from the product entirely. Through it all, I kept my routine steady. I showed up early, delivered results, and made no visible complaints. That's how you survive in corporate America. When the knives are out, you keep your head, even as you feel the blade slide between your ribs. But there's a paradox in building something indispensable. People forget how much they rely on you until you're gone. Sitting in that coffee shop, I traced the arc of it all: the long nights, the billion-dollar contracts, the quiet sacrifices, and realized the board might think they'd just cut a line item from the budget. What they'd actually done was remove the one person holding together the single most valuable asset Halvorsen Dynamics possessed. I took a slow sip of coffee and glanced at my watch. The office was still in full swing back on Madison Avenue. Chase would be in my old conference room by now, probably explaining to his team how transitions are opportunities. The truth, the real transition had already started. And it wasn't the company's. 2 days after I walked out of Halvorsen Dynamics, my official email account went dark. I knew because the autoforward I'd set to my personal inbox stopped delivering. It didn't matter. The real channels of communication in my world weren't corporate email. They were personal cell numbers, private Slack groups, encrypted signal chats, networks built over years of solving problems quietly and delivering results when no one else could. That morning, I woke up to 3 unread messages from my closest client contacts. All of them were variations on the same theme: we're hearing about changes on your team. What's going on? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I sent a brief, neutral text to each: I'm no longer with Halvorsen Dynamics as of this week. It's been an honor working with you. No complaints. No offers. Just the fact. The same way I'd delivered quarterly metrics for years: precise, clean, verifiable. By noon, my phone was buzzing constantly. The industry rumor mill had engaged. I ignored most of it and turned to something more important. The Helix 9 system had been my brainchild, but that wasn't the real advantage. The advantage was in the architecture, specifically, in how its operational control layers were structured. Years ago, when we were designing the platform for scalability, I'd insisted on creating a root-level master auth protocol that could only be initiated by one of 3 people in the company: me, the CTO, or Martin himself. It wasn't a backdoor, it was a safeguard, built to prevent catastrophic errors or unauthorized core modifications. As of the day I was fired, that protocol had never been transferred out of my control. I logged into my secure admin panel using credentials that were separate from my day-to-day corporate login. These were housed in a private server I personally maintained, a system approved by legal years earlier for disaster recovery scenarios. The dashboard lit up in the familiar deep blue interface I designed myself. All primary functions of Helix 9 were operational. Data pipelines were stable, processing speeds optimal. But in the access attempts log, something caught my eye. 3 failed master auth protocol requests in the past 24 hours, all originating from an IP address tied to Chase's newly expanded integration task force. They were trying to get in. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The reality settled in: Chase and his team wanted full control over Helix 9, not just the marketing veneer, but the actual operational core. And they had no idea the MAP was designed in such a way that brute force attempts would automatically trigger security protocols. If they kept trying, Helix 9 would lock them out entirely for 72 hours. And that lockout wouldn't just affect development access, it would halt all non-essential processing, which would in turn delay client analytics reports. A 7-hour delay might not sound like much to an outsider. But for companies that relied on Helix 9 for real-time supply chain adjustments, it was an eternity. I stared at the logs a moment longer, then opened the client dependency matrix, a visual representation of every active contract, mapped by reliance on Helix 9's predictive modules. 48 of our top 50 clients were flagged as high dependency. If those reports stopped arriving on schedule, the calls to Halvorsen Dynamics would start within hours. And they'd all be asking the same question: where's Amelia? It wasn't sabotage. I wasn't touching a single operational line. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do: protect itself from unauthorized control. I closed the dashboard and shifted to the other piece of the puzzle: documentation. In my years leading strategic development, I'd kept meticulous records not just of technical design decisions, but of client integration timelines, board presentations, even informal promises Martin had made to investors. Many of those promises hinged on upcoming Helix 9 enhancements that existed only as prototypes in my private sandbox. Without me, those prototypes were just lines of untested code. I began compiling a clean, chronological file of every significant Helix 9 milestone. Not for legal purposes, at least, not yet. But because precision mattered in what I was about to do next. At 2:17 p.m., a name flashed across my phone: David Lee, CTO of a competing firm I respected. We'd met 5 years ago at a tech conference in Austin, bonded over bad coffee and the mutual frustration of watching marketing teams overpromise what engineering teams couldn't possibly deliver. "Amelia," he said when I answered, "I heard you're a free agent now." "I suppose that's one way to put it." There was a pause. "Let me guess, Chase finally got his wish?" "You guessed right." "Well," he said, "if you're open to a conversation, we're building something in the analytics space that could use your touch. And frankly, our clients would pay a premium for someone with your track record." I didn't commit. "Send me what you can without an NDA." "We'll see." We ended the call politely, but my mind was already racing. A move to a competitor wasn't my immediate goal, but knowing I had options was part of the leverage game. By evening, I had 3 competing narratives forming in my head: Halvorson Dynamics reality, they thought they'd installed their chosen figurehead over my work without disruption. Client perception, they still saw me as the face and mind behind Helix 9. The truth, operational control of their most valuable asset was still tethered, inescapably, to me. The difference between those 3 narratives was where my power lived. At 8:42 p.m., I checked the admin logs again. 2 more failed access attempts. The countdown to a full 7-hour lockout was well underway. I closed my laptop, the glow fading from the screen, and sat in the quiet of my apartment. Outside, the city was awash of headlights and winter wind. They thought firing me was the end of my story at Halvorson Dynamics. In reality, it was just the point where the plot turned. The 7-hour lockout hit at 9:06 a.m. on a Wednesday. I knew the exact moment it happened, because my phone lit up with a message from one of my former engineering leads: 3 words, no punctuation, "It's happening now." I didn't reply. Instead, I refreshed the secure admin dashboard from my personal laptop. Every non-essential processing module was frozen. The heartbeat monitor, a visual indicator I'd designed for operational health, pulsed a steady amber instead of green. Chase's team would still have limited access to client-facing dashboards, but without the back-end analytics feeding them, those dashboards would be little more than empty shells. By noon, the ripple effect would start to show. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:43 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID was blocked, but the voice was unmistakable: Martin Halvorson. "Amelia," he said, skipping any attempt at small talk, "we're having some technical hiccups with Helix 9. Do you have a minute?" I let a beat of silence hang between us. "I'm no longer with Halvorson Dynamics, Martin. You'll have to go through your current team." "This isn't about politics," he said quickly. "This is about uptime. Some of our key accounts are concerned. I'm sure Chase has it under control." The pause on his end was heavy. "He's working on it." I could almost hear the unspoken, "but it's not working." "Good luck," I said, and ended the call. I wasn't lying, this wasn't sabotage. The system was doing exactly what it was built to do: lock out unauthorized access attempts to protect client data. They'd tripped the wire themselves. By 1:15 p.m., the first email arrived from a client, not to my corporate address, but to my personal one. "We've been told there's a delay in our analytics reports. Can you confirm what's going on?" I replied with the same neutral precision I'd used in every update for 12 years. "I'm no longer with Halvorson Dynamics as of last week. Unfortunately, I can't speak to their current operations." It didn't matter that I wasn't giving them details. Clients knew how to read between the lines. The next morning, a contact in procurement at one of our largest logistics clients called. "We've been on the phone with your replacement," she said, lowering her voice. "He doesn't understand our integration, Amelia. He keeps asking the wrong questions." I kept my tone even. "I'm sure he's doing his best." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "His best isn't going to keep this contract alive." The lockout timer ticked down in my private dashboard. 44 hours left. Enough time for tension to boil. That afternoon, I took a meeting with David Lee, the CTO who'd called earlier in the week. We met at a quiet wine bar on the Upper West Side neutral ground. He laid out his company's plans for an advanced analytics product still in prototype phase. "I'm not saying you'd have to jump ship right away," he said, swirling his glass. "But if you were to consult even off the record, I think we could accelerate by 6 months. And I think certain clients might be interested in what we're building." I didn't commit, but I listened. Every option was a chess piece, even if I didn't move it yet. When I got home that evening, I opened the folder of meticulously organized documentation I'd started compiling days earlier. Timelines, architecture notes, client dependencies, board promises, all laid out in a way that made the interconnectedness of Helix 9 impossible to ignore. At 8:12 p.m., another call came in, this time from Chase himself. "Amelia," he started, his voice tighter than usual. "We've run into a situation." I let him talk. "The system's locked us out of certain functions. We're missing deadlines. The board's breathing down our necks." I think he hesitated. "I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot." I could almost hear him trying to swallow his pride. "Chase," I said evenly, "if there's a security protocol active, it's because someone triggered it. You should check your access logs." "We have," he said, irritation seeping in. "We just need your help to reset it." "Off the record. No one has to know." "I can't help you," I said. "I don't have authorization anymore." "You designed it." His composure cracked. "This is your system. And it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, protecting client data from unauthorized access." I hung up before he could answer. By Thursday morning, the situation was starting to spill beyond Halvorson Dynamics walls. Industry blogs were picking up whispers about service disruptions affecting multiple Fortune 50 companies. The stock had dipped 4 points by midday. I didn't need to stoke the fire. It was burning on its own. Instead, I sent 3 carefully worded messages, one each to the primary contacts at our largest clients. The wording was deliberate. "I'm aware you may be experiencing delays. I am no longer with Halvorson Dynamics, but I value the work we've done together. I'll keep you informed if I have any relevant updates." It wasn't a solicitation. It wasn't a pitch. It was a reminder that I existed, that I still cared about their outcomes, and that I wasn't the one letting them down. By Friday afternoon, with less than 12 hours left on the lockout timer, Martin called again. "Amelia," he said, his voice quieter this time. "If we arrange a consulting agreement, generous terms, would you be willing to come in, just to smooth this over?" "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I've made other plans." Silence. "Then, if this goes any further, we could lose contracts." "I'm sorry to hear that." When the 72 hours expired at 9:06 p.m. that night, the system automatically restored full functionality. Data pipelines resumed, reports began populating again, and Chase's team probably breathed a collective sigh of relief. But the damage was done. Clients had been rattled. Questions had been asked. And once trust cracks in this business, it doesn't seal back without leaving a mark. The following Monday, I got a call from one of those clients, the logistics giant whose renewal Chase had hijacked 6 months earlier. "We've decided to open our analytics contract to competitive bids," the VP of operations told me. "If you land somewhere else, Amelia, call me first." That was the moment I knew the silent countermove had worked. I hadn't touched a single line of code. I hadn't made a single accusation. I'd simply allowed the truth to reveal itself under pressure. And the truth was simple: Halvorson Dynamics without me was weaker. Much weaker. By Tuesday morning, the whispers had gone public. Major clients report disruptions in Halvorson Dynamics' flagship analytics platform. Business outlets didn't have proof, but they didn't need it. The implication was enough. The stock fell 6% before closing. Inside the company, fracture lines spread fast. 2 Fortune 50 clients invoked performance clauses to reassess their contracts. The logistics giant had already opened bidding. Competitors were circling, and they were calling me first. I stayed silent. The less I chased, the more my name carried weight. IT logs told the real story. Chase's team had triggered the lockout with repeated failed master off-protocol attempts. A safeguard I'd once sold to the board as the reason Helix 9 could be trusted was now the reason the company was bleeding. On Thursday, Julia Myers from the board called. Off the record, she said, "Was this lockout caused by unauthorized access?" "Yes," I answered. "And the documentation was given to every executive." By Friday morning, Chase's name was gone from the leadership directory. The statement was corporate theater, pursuing other opportunities. Martin stayed for now, but his credibility was shattered. Clients cared only about outcomes, and under his watch, Halvorson Dynamics had suffered its first major failure in a decade. The following week, Julia called again. Martin stepping down. Interim CEO is Paul Riley. I knew Paul competent, steady, but not a visionary. Recovery would be slow, especially with contracts slipping away. That Friday, I walked through a bare Central Park, winter air sharp against my face. 12 years of work had been traded for a nephew's ego. Without raising my voice or lifting a finger against the system, I'd let reality do the work. By the time I reached 72nd Street, the decision was made. The next call from David Lee wouldn't be exploratory. It would be an agreement. By Tuesday morning, industry rumors had become headlines. Major clients report disruptions in Halvorson Dynamics' flagship analytics platform. No hard proof, just enough to make the stock slide 6% before the close. Inside, the ripple was instant. The logistics giant opened their contract to competitive bids. 2 other Fortune 50 clients invoked performance clauses. Competitors began calling me not with offers, but with one question: where are you going? I stayed silent. In this business, the less you chase, the more they want you. The board's internal review confirmed what I already knew. Chase's team had tripped the master off protocol with repeated failed attempts. The safeguard I'd once pitched as proof Helix 9 was secure beyond compromise had just ended his career. On Thursday, Julia Myers from the board called. Off the record, was it unauthorized access? Yes, I said. And every executive had the documentation. By Friday morning, Chase's name was gone from the leadership directory. The official line? Pursuing other opportunities. Martin stayed in his chair, but credibility doesn't survive failure. Clients cared only about outcomes, and under his watch, the company's flagship product had stumbled for the first time in over a decade. A week later, Julia called again. Martin stepping down. Paul Riley will serve as interim CEO. Paul was competent but no visionary. Recovery would be slow, and contracts would keep bleeding out. That Friday, I walked through a leafless Central Park. The wind was sharp, the paths almost empty. 12 years of building had been traded for a nephew's ego. And I hadn't raised my voice, sent a threat, or touched a single line of code. I'd let the system and their own decisions do the damage. By the time I reached 72nd Street, my mind was made up. The next time David Lee called, I wouldn't be exploring possibilities. I'd be closing a deal. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in David Lee's corner office, the skyline stretching behind him. The contract lay between us: equity stake, full creative control, no interference. I signed without hesitation. By the following Monday, 3 former Halvorson Dynamics clients had formally moved their contracts to my new firm. More were in talks. I didn't pitch them. They came. Trust follows people, not logos. From my new office, I watched the news ticker crawl. Halvorson Dynamics reports 18 revenue decline, interim CEO faces pressure. The board's search for permanent leadership dragged on. Contracts bled. The market stopped betting on a turnaround. One afternoon, an envelope arrived at my desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note from Martin Halvorson: "We underestimated you. If you're ever willing to talk, my door is open." I slid it into a drawer without reply. Success wasn't about going back. It was about building forward, on my own terms. A month later, David handed me the quarterly figures: a sharp uptick in revenue, driven largely by accounts I'd brought over. He raised his glass in a quiet toast. To the best acquisition we never had to buy. I smiled, but didn't drink right away. Outside, the city moved on, winter giving way to early spring. 12 years at Halvorsen Dynamics had ended in a single meeting. But in less than 3 months, I'd built something stronger, freer, and entirely mine. The best revenge wasn't loud. It was standing at the top again, knowing they could see me and knowing I didn't need them anymore.